an entire season of fellowship interviews, so she'll have a little bit to chime in and everything. She'll be able to answer some of your questions. But otherwise, we're going to do this session, and then we're going to do one on how to do rank lists, and then we're hoping our third one will be a little bit of intro to intern year and things people might expect. So Rula is supposed to come here and talk about this because she's had a little bit of experience with interview setup, but we wanted to adapt this a little bit to the virtual environment. So there were a whole bunch of questions about things that you needed to buy or what kind of background to have that were submitted ahead of time. So we've kind of broken down what we think probably the best setup is. In terms of lighting, don't follow I'm doing the wrong thing. So you should not be backlit as much as possible, and you should be in a well-lit environment. So if you have a room in your house where you can close the door and turn on the light, maybe you have natural light, all of those things would be useful. Rula mentioned that it's better, and I can now see why. It's better that the light come from in front of you. Just adds a little bit less distraction and gives you a little bit more emphasis on your facial features and things like that, so people can pay attention to you a little bit more. And then if you have unfavorable lighting, I currently do, you can consider getting a ring light. I found a whole bunch, I put a picture of it in this top corner. I found a whole bunch of pretty affordable ones on Amazon earlier, and I have a couple of friends from undergrad who are doing auditions virtually for acting jobs and things like that, and they've been using this as an option to kind of portray themselves better. So if you feel like your lighting's unfavorable, that's definitely something that you can consider. In terms of sound, Rula's #1 advice is try not to have your dog in the background chewing on its squeaky toys, but the obvious thing is to avoid any sort of distractions. So if you can find a place anywhere, it doesn't really matter where, it doesn't have to be at your house, where you can have a quiet space and close the door and people won't bother you, that's probably the best. Yeah. Sarah.
I feel like we're good examples of like the lighting, because Tara has the right lighting, it looks like.
But I also have a distracting pet, so.
That's okay. Mike was like knocking on the door of our studio.
Yeah.
In terms of where to put your computer, Rula's rule of thumb was to try to put it at face level. So my computer's kind of sitting right below my chest right now. It's sitting on like this. But if you see that if I put it up a little bit higher, so this is closer to face level, then it's a little bit better angle of what you look like, so that might be better. You can put it up even a little bit higher, that might be better. And you don't need any sort of equipment for this. You can just put it on a whole bunch of books. If you have any like big medical school books, just use those. In terms of a background, we all agreed when we talked about it that a simple background is best. Trying to avoid the like pre-fabricated Zoom backgrounds is also best, mostly because when you move, if you move at all, if you use your hands to talk, those backgrounds don't accommodate that very well, and so it's very distracting. So I put these pictures of bookcases and such, but if you think about it, most people that you Zoom with that are in an office setting or something like that are sitting in front of a bookcase. So if you have anything where maybe you have a bookcase and a desk, or you can move something behind you so it's not just a complete blank wall, that adds a little bit of interest. Not mandatory, and none of these things are really, I don't think anyone's going to judge you on the interview setup that you have. We all understand that this is kind of a weird scenario and that everyone's doing their best. So these are just some suggestions. And then the most important thing I think for all of us is, or for all of you, is to practice. So, try to pick a time of day where you have some friends that are available. I don't know what you're doing, Tara, but anyways, it says that you're trying to annotate something. I don't know what anyways, practice is key. So if you can, find a friend that you can do this with, and play around with your settings and make sure that your mic is working and that all of these, that everything seems like the lighting is okay and the sound seems okay, that's going to help you ultimately down the line. Moving on. Now I'm annotating and I don't know how to get rid of that.
Yeah, so we've had like, so many Zoom meetings that basically now my go-to setup, even if I'm not trying to like look particularly good, just so I don't get like frustrated with it, it's just to turn all the lights off in my apartment. If there's enough sunlight, I work with that. I put like a little lamp there. I prop it up on like a cardboard box and I call it a day.
Sarah always looks
It's a new era.
In terms of scheduling, I think that I was supposed to talk about this slide. So scheduling is going to be a little bit different this year. The timing of interview invitations is going to be a little bit different than it's been in the years past. I think that we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in a typical year, you have a standard interview window. So the Program Directors Association, or I forget what it's called, organization of program directors has kind of decided that in order to keep things fair, they would have this 3-week window during which they could offer interviews. And so if people are offering you interviews ahead of that, some programs like to do that to kind of get in early kind of thing. But it's not, I would say the large majority of programs don't do that. They will offer interviews during the standard window. So you might notice that some of your internal medicine friends, for example, are getting interviews like a month before you stay calm. That's okay. The otolaryngology ones tend to be a little bit later. In a typical year, I would say they were somewhere like maybe the first, second week of October that people started receiving interview invitations, but now it's probably even later than that because I don't think that we'll get access to your applications as early as we typically do.
Yeah, Gabby, I can actually say that the SUO, I think the guidelines from the SUO is that we don't extend interview offers until November 9th.
There you go.
And the programs can start seeing your applications on October 21st.
So that being said, if you get an interview or two invitation before October 9th, that can happen. But if you don't, then that's okay. Don't freak out. It's totally fine. In terms of the way interviews are offered, it's usually on a rolling basis. There are several ways programs choose to do that. One is via the WAMC website. And so in years past, it's been that you get this no reply kind of email and you have to log into the WAMC where you have all of your programs listed and reply with a preferred date. I don't know if this is still the case. I'm going to assume it is not changed. But word of advice is if you're on a rotation or something where you can't be by your phone for an entire day or can't be by your computer for an entire day, maybe designate someone to help you schedule interviews if possible. So I know that I think I was on a sub-by here when things started being offered and I had my husband man my email essentially. So if I was getting an email and I wasn't answering to it, he would just grab whatever interview date was available. Occasionally you'll get a phone call or a personal email.
From Matt.
Matt, we do that. We do. So those are other ways, but I would say the large majority will go through the WAMC website, and we'll send this email and we'll give you a couple of date options, which brings me to this calendar. So I put the link here and we can email this out at the end of the session, but the SUO has a calendar. I don't think it's been updated quite yet. So this is obviously from December of last year, but it'll tell you on any day of the week which programs are offering interviews. And I think it can be found on OTO-HNS somewhere as well. I just found it on the SUO, and I know that this is probably the most reliable one. But if you find it on OTO-HNS, that's probably the same idea, same calendar. And so you can see, on a given day, which programs are offering interviews. And that helps you with planning a little bit. So because you get interviews on a rolling basis, it's going to be a little bit hard to say, oh, sure, I'll grab this date, this random date, without knowing that you're going to overlap with a different program that you might want an interview to. And so in order for you to avoid switching dates, which is really challenging for programs and, not frowned upon by any means, but it's just definitely, it makes things a lot more difficult. This makes you a lot more prepared. So what I would recommend is looking at this calendar, making note of programs that you're really interested in that you don't want to miss an interview if it's offered to you, maybe keeping those days open. And if just gives you a little bit more guidance. We recommend not doing more than one interview per day, so one institution per day, in the same way that you would if you were traveling to these institutions, just because it tends to be really chaotic. Things overlap a whole bunch. So just to keep your life and your stress level lower, it's better to do it that way. We also recommend taking the day off of work or educational activities if possible. We know that not everyone can do this, and so these are just things to make the interview process less stressful for you. And it is okay for you to accept invitations and withdraw. So let's say that you, in the beginning, get a few invitations to programs that you'd be happy with, but then you start getting more and you can't handle the amount of interviews that you have, or they happen to be on the same day as an interview you really truly want. I would recommend you can withdraw from interviews. It's okay, but just be judicious about it and be prompt about it. So if you're holding an interview spot and you're not letting it go, then someone else in the pool can't have that interview spot, and so that just looks worse for you, I think. So if you can, the quicker that you can let go of that interview spot, the better. But it is okay, at least so.
Yeah. And the rolling interview offer things is important too, because I remember, like people kind of freaking out on OTO-match. Take OTO-match like definitely with a grain of salt, like use it judiciously, don't take it as law. And if someone gets an invitation to a program, that doesn't mean it's not coming to you eventually. Like things kind of come out in batches and whatnot. So, just take things on that website, I think, with a little bit of a grain of salt, especially when it comes to scheduling. Oh, sorry to interrupt your flow.
Oh no, you're fine. I guess Mike was trying to come out earlier because my pager went off, which is very surprising. So I followed up. Okay, so what to wear? I think this was me also. So obviously, as you would if you were going to any in-person interview, professional attire is recommended. And I put this kind of cartoon on the internet. Silly, I know, but we recommend neutral colors as much as you can. I think the way Tara said it yesterday is you don't want to stand out. You don't want to be the person who wore that weird thing, and that's how people remember you. You want people to remember you by, the intelligent person that you are and by all of your accomplishments. And so I would recommend neutral colors. That includes, shirt and tie colors, kind of neat professional hairstyles. I was telling them yesterday when we talked about this a little bit that someone when I interviewed recommended that I put my hair up because I tend to play with my hair a lot. So, during your practice sessions that you're doing with your friends or family or whoever can help you, do a practice session, see if there are any mannerisms that you have that might be distracting. And so try to do something about your hairstyle or whatever to avoid it. It is okay to wear makeup if you typically do. There's no need to do it if you don't typically do that. And so, the rule of thumb is sort of just you want to be the best version of yourself and you don't need to go overboard to do that. But you also want to be professional at the same time. And then what to have with you on the table as you're doing this is a pen and paper. So you want to make sure that you can take notes. You want to make sure that you can have something to refer to if, take a note and you have questions that you want to ask and someone's asking you if you have questions and you all of a sudden freeze and can't remember them. Having a notepad and something like that is totally reasonable. Okay, so how to prep for interviews. Tara, you want to take this one?
Sure. Sorry, I'm just reading the slide because I didn't have a chance to read all this beforehand. Yeah, so interview preparation is going to be, pretty much the same as if these were in person. And it's tough because you're interviewing at a ton of programs. A lot of things are going to be kind of the same, at least what's on the websites. That you do your research from beforehand, but try and do that research. And so I think we send out a list of staff that you'll be interviewing with ahead of time. Matt, is that right? Yeah. So that helps you narrow down a little bit, get a sense of at least what specialty, what people's backgrounds are that you'll be interviewing with. Most websites will give you kind of links to research in the department, things that are kind of changing or up and coming, or that they think are sort of standout. And so those are good things to kind of like lock in on. And then in terms of Q&A sessions, so we have things, we have these 2 or 3 sessions that we're doing that are supposed to be a little bit more of like an educational resource for you guys. But I also know that a lot of programs, and we also will likely do something like this, we'll have Q&As either with faculty or with the residents, to sort of try and replace, those like pre-interview dinners and happy hours that really give you the chance to like ask questions, both like about the lifestyle and about the program, because those are 2 kind of important but different aspects that you want to get a sense of. In terms of, and so all of that is just, some of it's for your like education, some of it will allow you to be sort of prepared and ask intelligent questions during the interview itself. In terms of like preparing yourself, I think it's a good idea, especially in the beginning when you're feeling a little rusty, to review your CV and your personal statement, because a lot of people will pull questions directly from there. And so you just want to have everything kind of like fresh in your mind and be able to talk about it comfortably and easily. Especially research and hobbies, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but those are things I think that people like to pull on because they're a little bit more unique to each applicant. And then common interview questions. There's a separate slide on that I'll go over too. Especially in the beginning, it's good to have a little bit of like a canned response for these so you don't sort of freeze up. But as you do more and more of these interviews, they'll just become like kind of old hat, like you'll just be reciting them in your sleep. And again, practice. And go to the next slide.
So I think Matt was going to talk a little bit about signaling, since this is a new concept this year, but I tried to include a little information on the slide for you.
Yeah, so this is one, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is, I think we're all tired of hearing this, but it's a wild time right now. So the programs are just as stressed out and trying to figure out what to do to replace things as you all are. So, like when it comes to this topic specifically, this was something that the SUO just announced. I'm not even sure if it's gone live yet. The timeline they put out there was September sometime. So what signaling is it's where you get to select 5 programs that you are especially interested in based off whatever your preferences are. And it's meant to be a way to sort of replace what sub-Is and letters of recommendation would normally accomplish in other years. It's hard to say right now how programs will use signaling, which I think is the hard reality, is that since this is new to us, we're not even sure what it's going to look like when we get this report as a program. We just know that on your end, you're going to log in, you're going to say, my name is blank, and these are my 5 top programs, and then we'll get a report. So like it says, be judicious and honest and stay true to yourself and your interests. Follow whatever your priorities are. If it is location or academic prowess, whatever your priorities are important. And know that on our end, we're just as freaking out as you, unfortunately. So yeah, did I hit everything on that one?
I think so.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is I think typically away rotations were used as ways to show programs that you were specifically interested in them, willing to travel geographically. So if you've stayed on the East Coast your entire undergrad and graduate experience or your entire life, previously you were able to do an away rotation somewhere on the West Coast to kind of give them an impression that you were willing to come there. These were things that people would recommend that you do. I by no means, if you're not willing to geographically relocate on the other coast, I don't think it's worth it to use this as a way to increase your chances or anything. But if you're truly willing to move and you think, you want to just go to the best program for you, and that's and you think that your geography would hold you from doing that, then I think this is definitely a good way to express interest and to let programs know that you are interested in them. So I think the most important thing with everything that you do in the interview process is just to be honest, because I think trying to play games and fake people out doesn't end up working in your favor. People tend to get mixed signals, and so a lot of the times they'll ask you and you just answer honestly what you were willing and not willing to do. I think that's
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, like, and even in our program, I know this is across the board, just because a student doesn't come to us for a sub-I doesn't mean that they're not going to get an interview with us. So if you are signaling to certain programs, I don't think you should be approaching it in a way of like, oh, I'm giving up interviews to other programs because of what I'm signaling. That is not what this is going to be used for. It's going to be used as like a additive to the process rather than whatever the other word is. I can't think of it right now.
Ablative? No.
Ablative?
Sarah, I think that you were on for common interview questions, but we wanted to kind of go through, what to expect a little bit. Obviously, this is not a self-limiting list by any means, so keep that in mind.
Yeah. So these are the types of things that get asked kind of over and over again. And like, you'd be amazed like how your entire wealth of human experience just like flies out the window when you suddenly get like asked a question about it. So I think it's useful to kind of go through ahead of time and like pick out some anecdotes that could apply to some of these, have a little bit of like a canned response, especially to the dreaded, like, tell me about yourself, like totally open-ended, or like strengths, weaknesses. Don't lie and be like, my weakness is that I'm so punctual. Like, try and kind of like work through some of those kinks ahead of time. Some of the ones at the bottom are like a really good opportunity to sort of make yourself stand out a little bit. So like, what do you like to do in your spare time? I think hobbies, we were talking about this yesterday. Hobbies they're kind of a good hook because, a lot of applicants have pretty similar experiences. Everyone did well in med school and college, and everyone has some research. But if you have like a research project or a kind of funky hobby that's like really unique or interesting, that kind of like locks into people's brains. So don't be afraid to highlight those things. I think, all of these are pretty self-explanatory on that regard. Maybe next slide. Perfect. So some common topics and questions continued. Definitely, why did you pick ENT and what do you like about this program specifically are super common. Talking about the program, some of it you'll get from the website or a little bit of, just knowledge from some of the presentations, but it's also good if you have a link to the area, if you have a friend of a friend who was a resident here or something like that. It's good to kind of pull out some of those like personal ties, especially like Gabby was talking about, if you're not from the area, things that say like why you might be more willing to go there, if those exist. I had like really no ties to Portland. I just really wanted to come here, and that was like okay. But if you have family here, you spent a bunch of time like in that area, those are good things to like bring up. I got very few actual like ENT clinical questions. I did get a few of like, walk me through the scenario, or like one was really terrifying. It was like, tell me the steps of your favorite surgery. So, like, don't bite off more than you can chew with that kind of stuff, and be honest if you don't know something. Behavioral interviewing is increasingly popular. It's not something that we do. And there's kind of a difference between behavioral interviewing and stress interviewing. And I didn't really see, I don't think much, if any, of the latter, except in one or two like practice interviews. But they will have these kind of more anecdotal or open-ended questions about like when you were challenged, give an example, or they might give you a conflict and ask like how you would deal with it, how would you resolve it. Like ethical questions are pretty common. And then a few little kind of oddball ones. I don't think I was ever told like, oh, can you, or tell me a joke, but I've definitely heard that as a common one. I was asked on multiple occasions to pick a song or like a station for an interview. And that to this day gives me so much anxiety, like in the OR when I have to pick music. So just like have a few, those are a few things to just like jot them down on a note card, lock them into your brain ahead of time, be like, if they ask me music, I'm gonna say this song or like this station, have like one joke in your back pocket, you might not use it. And if these things come up and you're not really prepared for them, like whatever, they're usually just for fun. So don't take them super seriously. Or if they like ask you to do like a weird task, a lot of it I think is really for the interviewer's amusement rather than super intense scrutiny of you. But
yeah, and I think people will ask you things to kind of see that how you react to different circumstances. So I was telling them yesterday that I think someone asked me to build something with Legos while talking to them, and it was like to see how flustered I got, but also to see if I could do that and also talk at the same time. So these are pretty skills that we all pretty much have, and as long as you don't stress about them and you just do your best, people aren't necessarily judging what you built with your Legos, but they're sort of just making sure you continue to engage in conversation and multitask a little bit, which I think most of us are fairly good at doing at this point.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this is the latter. This is the most dreaded question on the interview trail is, do you have any questions? Expect pretty much every program to ask you this. This is not uncommon. And realistically, I recommend to everyone that I talk about to take the interview opportunity to learn about the program. So sorry, I didn't mean to do that. If there are specific things that you're interested in, you want to know if the program does them or has opportunities for you to do those things, this is a good time for you to ask. If there's something that you've heard about in those intro talks, that most programs will do in some variety even this year, this is jot them down, and this is a good time to ask programs about them. So I think it's a valuable time for you, and people will use this, to sort of stop asking questions, but also to see if you have anything about the program that they can sell you on, essentially. We recommend asking open-ended questions and trying to practice writing open-ended questions for these, just to continue the conversation and make it so it's not so awkward. And I like to tell people that it's okay to ask the tough questions that all of us want to know. Maybe this was bold of me, but I did ask a lot about educational experiences and how people dealt with how people were taught in the operating room or clinic. And I think people know what you're getting at. They all know that we want to know how much we're going to be operating and how much we're going to do certain things as clinicians and as residents. And so it's okay to ask them, just ask them tactfully. So I think the next slide has some suggestions of common questions that are typically asked. So you can ask things like what the strengths of the program are, what aspects of the program might need improvement, or be things that people are working on. You can ask things like, what do most graduates do after residency, to get an impression of whether people are pressured to go to fellowship, whether most people go to fellowship, how much support there is for career choices after residency, etc. Other suggestions, you can ask about didactics and whether the time for didactics is protected. I think this is pretty across the board these days, but it's good to know, and it's good to know what these things are if they're not described in those introductory sessions. One thing I like to ask is how much support do residents receive for research, because I think most of us do research no matter what program you go to, but the support that the department gives you is going to be different at every program. Like I said, I think I asked a lot about teaching style, how residents progress through residency. Rula brought up a few really good questions like, are residents involved in shaping the program? You know, how much say do you have in where things go, and molding things that aren't working, that kind of thing. You can ask, you know, in order to see the type of stressors that a resident might go throughout a program, you can ask what makes a resident thrive somewhere, or you know, what makes a resident have challenges somewhere. You can ask, you know, how feedback is given, and then how autonomous residents feel during their last year of residency. I think a lot of the people that you're going to be interviewing with are chief residents, and so that's a good question to ask those chief residents. You can ask, you know, how the program is changing, and you know, whether they're doing more hiring or anything like that. And then feel free to ask personal questions. So if you are super interested about what brought someone to a specific program, or you know, how the faculty interact with each other or something like that, those are all fair game questions. For after interview interviews, there are a lot of things that I recommend people to do. There are lots of rumors on the interview trail, and you may or may not hear them now since there's a virtual interview trail. But people do all sorts of things. They send thank you notes to every person that they've interviewed with, you know, to not sending anything. I think the range is pretty broad. The number one rule with the post-interview etiquette is to follow instructions. If a program tells you not to contact them, do not contact them. That shows that you're not following instructions, and people are saying these things because they just don't want to be contacted, and that's okay. So it's okay for you not to send that thank you letter if the program director said don't send it. If you feel so inclined, it is okay to send brief thank you emails to the program coordinator, chairman, and program director, chairman, and program coordinator. This is by no means mandatory, and I don't think, Matt, you can maybe speak to this, but I don't think anyone, you know, puts a negative point on your record because you didn't do this. I think unless you had a really riveting conversation with a faculty member or something like that, I would not send an email to every single faculty you interviewed with. It's just a lot of emails for you, and it's a lot of emails for them. A lot of the times you'll be given an opportunity to follow up with residents from a specific program if you have any additional questions. It's totally okay to take us up on that. We're happy to help you decide and to answer any questions that, you know, the interview day might not have given you, or to refresh your memory on something 1 or 2 months later. If you have a particular interest in a program, it is totally okay to have one of your mentors or an attending from your program reach out and communicate your interest as we get closer to match day, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our rank list session as well. And then one common thing that people do is write letters of intent. So was designed to be a letter. It's kind of like signaling, except for we've never signaled before. But you would write a letter to the number one program that you were interested in, saying, I'm going to rank you number one, essentially, and just in different words. You don't by any means have to do that, especially if you don't have like one program that you would die if you didn't end up at. You absolutely don't have to do that. If you do it, I would do it early, you know, after you've interviewed with all of your programs, but you know, not the day before match day kind of thing. And be honest, don't send more than one. Don't, you know, be honest with yourself and what you want. If it's truly a program that you see yourself at, describe why you would see yourself there. And it's okay for this to be brief as well. It doesn't matter if it's emailed or, you know, sent on paper or anything like that. And I think most importantly, be polite, respectful, and be patient. So if you're emailing a program, they're getting hundreds of emails. You can ask Matt about his daily life is these days with the emails. But especially during COVID time, since everything is virtual, it becomes very overwhelming. And so be brief, be polite in your emails, but also be patient if you don't hear back. And then Tara will end this with pearls of interviewing.
Perfect.
I will say, sorry, Tara, like as program coordinators, we will try our best to respond to your thank you emails. Like, I don't want to discourage anybody from emailing the program coordinator. We all really appreciate praise. So, you know, that's across the board. So.
Also just keep in mind that there are like rules about communication that programs can have with you. So like, you know, I remember I did write like an email of intent to this program telling them that I was ranking them first. And the email that I got back from Dr. Wax was like, great, thanks. Like they are not, and that was like the correct thing. Like he's not technically allowed to say things like we're ranking you to match or we're ranking you super highly. Some people might, but if they give you like a totally generic non-committal response, that's like technically the correct thing. And so don't take that like a bad sign. But yeah, that's a down the road problem a little bit. Perfect. So pearls of interviewing. It's super cheesy, but always be yourself. I know we just told you to dress like everyone else, but that is to kind of let yourself shine in other ways. And like Gabby said, being super honest with yourself about what you're looking for in a program. Just what you want and what's important to you. Knowing your application inside and out so that you can speak eloquently on it. Never, ever, ever, ever trash talk other programs. Don't do it on the trail to your colleagues or like your classmates. Don't do it during your interviews. And that can actually be really subtle. Like I remember I had an interview. It was actually on one of my sub-Is. It was a practice interview that they ran for like all their home students and sub-Is. And it was kind of intended to like trip you up. And one of the things, one of the faculty was trying really hard to get everyone to say why they didn't want to stay at their home program, like really pushing. And like in that situation, just like always stay positive, always like kind of turn it back to like why you maybe want to be at that program. So even kind of like subtle things can come off pretty negatively. So just like be aware of that. I don't think there's really like a lot of that going around, but just having it in your mind. Practice makes perfect. Some of this will be on your own time with friends, which I always felt super awkward about, but it's helpful. And some of it will just be the interview trail itself. You'll be a veteran by the end of it. And take notes. That's super important. I wish I had done a better job of that, just because like you'll go to so many programs. And I think for in the Zoom era, things will blend together even more than they do when we were running around traveling places. And so take notes about like actual likes and dislikes, but also kind of like your general feeling. Like if you get a specific vibe, like remind yourself of that, because it can be hard to sort of keep track at the end. And as Gabby said, it's as much as an opportunity for you to learn about the program as it is for them to learn about you. And people who are genuinely interested come off that way, and everyone likes to be liked. So if you're giving programs the sense that you're really interested, you really kind of like what they're selling, they're kind of going to like you more for it. So it's definitely a give and take, and I think that's important to remember.
And I think honestly, I just had one thing to add. When in doubt, unless you feel like you have like developed this relationship with the person that you're talking to, or you can be a little bit more casual without they're talking to you casually, but when in doubt, just revert to being professional. I think that you can prompt that. If you're having a riveting conversation and everyone's laughing and you feel like you can be a little bit more relaxed, that's okay. But just try to read your environment a little bit. I think some people are more okay with that than others. And so when in doubt, just revert to being as professional as you would be in a job or something like that, which is what this is. So,
yeah.
And I think that's all we have. So we wanted to open up the rest of the time for questions. Like Matt mentioned before, if you have any questions and you don't want to say them out loud, it's okay to submit them in the chat box. I have not been monitoring that, so he will let us know if there's anything in there. And then if not, you can feel free to just unmute yourself and ask questions for everyone. And I think, your questions are to everyone's benefit at this point. So.
How are your research questions for? I only ever got one really in-depth research interview where it happened to be that my research was sort of in the same field as a PhD researcher. And that was a little stressful because I felt like at times her questions were a little bit above my head. But honestly, that was a total anomaly. And for the most part, people will ask pretty open-ended questions. And if you can like generate some excitement about your research, like that's really, and sound knowledgeable about it, that's like really what matters. Like they're not, for the most part, going to know like what mTOR signaling pathway molecule, like they're people aren't going to know the ins and outs. So if you can give like a brief but like enthusiastic, interesting overview, that's almost always going to be the extent of it.
Yeah, to add to that, I think the advice that I was given was to have like a one-liner, you know, where you're not rambling on and on, but just have like a 1 to 2 sentence situation or speech that you have about, you know, each of your research projects. And some people, like Tara said, will ask you a little bit in more detail. Other people will ask you less. I think a question that I got at several programs, which surprised me, but I was warned about, was people will try to see if you've researched their institution and if there's any particular lab or anything that you're interested in working in as a resident there. And so I was asked that at least once or twice. And, you know, it helps if you've looked at the website the night before. So that's why we recommend doing that, and just getting a sense of, you know, trying to putting yourself in the shoes of a resident there. Other questions I got were related to the type of research that I wanted to do as a resident. So I think it's okay to be honest. If you hate basic science research, you know, don't say that you want to do that, even if that's a program requirement per se. Like most places will work with your interests. So be honest about things that you want to pursue.
Program fit. That's, you know, that's just going to be, it's just going to vary place to place. You know, a lot of that comes from, that's tough this year because a lot of that comes from kind of like the dinners and the happy hours, which is, again, it's for both sides. It's for us to kind of see like who's maybe like a similar fit to the people in the program, who's going to bring something kind of new and interesting. And that's definitely kind of tough for you, but you know, not being able to like visit the programs in person. So the things that we look for on interview day are usually just pretty basic. It's like, as residents, we're looking for people who seem personable, seem like they're going to work hard, seem like they're going to be easy to get along with. I always try to think also of like who's going to be like nice to their coworkers outside of the department and like kind of get along and like, you know, be nice within the hospital once they're working, which can be hard to tell. It's a little bit nebulous, but you can also ask those sorts of questions, you know, ask like, you know, what sort of things the residents do outside of work. Do most people live in the same area? Do most people have families? Like those are all like okay things to ask to get a sense of like where you'll fit in as well.
I do think, hey, this is Rula. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, Rula.
Hi. Missed you guys. Having just gone through this with my fellowship interviews, I do think that you will get a sense of kind of the culture of the program and like if people are like not sociopaths in talking to them. Like, and I think a lot of that is a hard thing to ask questions, like specific questions about, or to even like put into words necessarily, but like you'll talk to people and you'll be like, I can imagine fitting in with this crowd. You know, like people seem happy, they seem laid back. I don't know. It's a hard thing to kind of ask specific questions, I think, but it was definitely a sense where I was like, I could see myself hanging out with these people. And I agree with Tara about the whole, for us, you know, people just being personable and, you know, seeming like you're going to be a team player is super important.
So the dexterity portion, so that's kind of what I was talking about with like, I honestly think that a lot of times this is for either like a research project that they're doing or their own amusement. Like at one, I had to like carve something out of a bar of soap, and they later said that night that they literally just line them up and laugh at them, and like nobody cares. But I've also had ones where they like had like measured virtual things, or like, you know, like simulators, and that I think was part of like they were trying to collect data. I never thought that would factor. I never really felt that would factor strongly into my application. I don't, I certainly can't say that for sure. I think that's probably gonna fall by the wayside with virtual interviewing unless someone comes up with something super creative. But like, if they do, everyone's probably gonna be on the same foot as you of just like, oh, what is this? Like, we're doing this now. But they'd have to be pretty creative to come up with something to do over Zoom.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of those, like to add to what you said, are more to see what your reaction is. And so, stay calm and just try to get through whatever task that they have and try to just keep smiling and talking to them as much as you can while you're doing it.
Yeah.
I highly doubt they're going to get creative enough to come up with something, but you never know. People surprise you all the time.
Yeah.
Also to add about things that you look for on interview day. So like Tara said, you're not going to be able to see how people interact with one another quite as much as you would have in real life. But I think that the way that people answer your questions and the way that they ask me questions will kind of give you an impression of what they're interested in. And so if every single attending in the program asks you about your research and doesn't ask you anything else, then you're going to know that program is really interested in research. And so if you're not a resident who might be interested in doing a whole bunch of research, then maybe that program's not for you. So try to pick up subtle cues from what you're asked. And that's why we encourage having as many questions as possible regarding the things that you're actually interested in doing. Because the way that people react to your questions, you have to remember that as much as you don't know what they're going to ask you, they have no idea what you're going to ask them. And so you're going to be able to get social cues from that.
I'd also say that all programs are going to probably do the whole lunchtime resident presentation. This is like what life is like.
Mm-hmm.
I at least know that ours will. And I've always found it telling when you, like in ours, luckily everyone's in the photos, and that's really telling to be like, oh, all the residents are together. That's really like they all get along. And I think that's another cue you can take from, at least when it comes to culture. Definitely look at that.
Can I make a plug for our Instagram?
Why not? I don't
know. So I mean, I think everyone's trying to fill this void of like of that particular part, because normally we'd meet up with you in a bar, we'd feed you like mac and cheese, like it would be great, and like we'd you'd get a sense of us and we'd get a sense of you, and every program does some variation on that. And now we sort of have to fill the void. So I think we're not alone in like starting up some social, like getting a little more active on social media. I'll actually send the handle for ours if anyone wants to check it out. But I think a lot of programs are doing this. And so trying to find that information out either during the interview or even ahead of time to like just see what you can glean from that. That's gonna, I think, also give you a sense of what life is like and like what the sort of vibe of the program is. Ours is full of mountains.
For the next question, wait, sorry, you guys can still hear me?
Yeah.
Thoughts on sending emails? Oh, I probably wouldn't. And I think that's more for you than it is for them, because I think you'll be surprised about how much you find out about a program during an interview that end up changing your opinion. I do remember thinking I was surprised after interviewing with some programs and thinking, hey, I thought I was gonna really like that, and I didn't. And so I think sending emails prior to even interviewing them will come across as maybe a little strange to them, because they might not know you, and maybe and for you it might not be true after the interview.
Can't remember if I'm muted or not. I'm not. Okay. That being said, I think that at least when I was interviewing, if you did not receive an interview from a program you were very, very interested in, there were some people, like I said, be true and honest, but there were some people who would email, or if you're waitlisted, which can also happen, I forgot to mention that, if you're waitlisted a program, you know, it's okay for you to, if you're super interested in it and you really, really like to interview there, and you're not doing this for every single program that you've applied to, I think it's okay to send an email and kind of ask, you know, the status of your application. Obviously, if you were rejected, then don't do that. But if you just haven't heard back at all, sometimes you'll get a little bit of information from that. I would keep them short and polite and just say, you know, I'm really interested in interviewing at your program. I was wondering what the status of that was, but I would not do it in that, I would give it that 3-week window that we talked about, the rolling interview window, and you could do it afterwards if you want to. But I would limit it to really programs that you're super interested in, maybe 1 or 2 that you're not getting an interview at. I would not do it for every single program. I don't think it's very helpful. And I think overall, like Rula said, it can be a little bit weird depending on what you write, obviously. So
I had a question submitted to me about whether we anticipate that signaling will be used as a way to filter applicants who get interviews. I will say that I know for our program, and I feel like this is going to be the case for all the other programs, it's going to be used as, certainly as a way, it'll probably be used as a way to filter out the applicants who have already made it to the final pool of applicants that we're selecting interviews for. So in our program, we get all the applications, and then we come up with a final pool and then select from that pool, which is usually like 60 applicants, and we only interview 30. And so that's probably when the signaling is going to come into play, if anything. Again, I can't really say what it's going to be like in practice. And I understand there's probably a lot of concern about like ethics and how it's going to be used. I know on our end, we're going to try our hardest. I'll make sure of that. And then any thoughts on how long the interview day will be this year? I think that's, we're going to aim for half a day. That I think we need to be mindful of everyone's stamina when it comes to these kinds of calls. And Rula, maybe you can talk about what it was like to interview for a whole day versus, yeah, could you speak to that? Like what it was like and the different lengths that you've experienced?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just like lengths of interviews, you mean?
Yeah, like, was it possible? Like, what was it like to do a whole day of interviews virtually?
Freaking exhausting. I mean, I will say though, like, all interview days are pretty exhausting, even when they were in person. Just because, like, you're usually having to get up early from, like, flying in, and you're on your feet most of the day, and for girls, that usually means heels. And so, but I just finished, well, I have one last fellowship interview, so I kind of had just experienced this in real time, having to do all my interviews via Zoom. And it's obviously a little weird, like conversations are a little bit stilted, but it wasn't terrible. I mean, they usually build in breaks, which is nice. You obviously are saving money on travel costs, but it's like, I think whether or not they're short interviews, and I think most people, they probably will do kind of like 15, whatever, 20-minute interviews, and you might interview with 1 to 2 faculty at a time, which is what I did. And then they're kind of, you know, you'll go from like one Zoom room to another type situation. And it feels weird at first, but you start to get into a flow, and it's not like hugely dissimilar from my experience doing like residency interviews. So that was a little reassuring.
Cool. All right.
If any questions come up, you can feel free to contact us and let us know if you didn't get to ask it on here, or if you think of it 5 days from now, that's totally fine. We're happy to help. And we will, not sure, Matt, if you've published the timing of our next meeting or our next educational session. So, but we will have another one, like I said, on how to go about ranking programs, and we'll have some information then. But if anything comes up between now and then, we're happy to help. That's a good idea.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, residents.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.